And welcome back to our panel discussion, Advanced Cyber Monitoring, sponsored by RSA and Optiv here on federalnewsradio.com and Federal News Radio 1500 AM. My guests today are Lawrence Reed, Assistant Director for Security Operations at the Justice Department. Chad Sheridan is Chief Information Officer at the Agriculture Department's Risk Management Agency. Dr. Barry West is Senior Advisor and Senior Accountable Official for Risk Management at the Homeland Security Department. Peter Tran is General Manager and Senior Director for Worldwide Advanced Cyber Defense Practice at RSA. And Peter Schawalker, Director of Security Intelligence Solutions at Optiv. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. And let's talk more about the mobility and endpoint discussion we were having earlier, because that does add a new dimension with multiple devices per person, multiple operating systems, all kinds of variables introduced into the mix. And I'm interested in Justice Department's approach to all of that and how you bring that into cyber, because there's a lot of mobile development and mobile innovation really happening at the different justice pieces.
Right. Yeah, mobile is a big part of the mission for a lot of the components within justice. The approach we're generally taking on this is a few different pieces, right? So we're segmenting things up appropriately based on the data that's being processed or the mission that's being executed on it. We're managing the devices that should be managed. We're not managing the ones that shouldn't. And we're looking at the authentication that goes around those and what we can do with PIV or derived PIV credentials if we can get that working in a useful way, and trying to combine all those together so that we get something we can manage, or at least we can understand on that. And probably the last piece that we're still struggling with a little bit is managing the data then, and how do we secure the data no matter where it ends up, because people do their job on a lot of different devices, some authorized, some maybe not, but we still need to worry about securing that data, so that gets to be a big challenge as we're pushing out, getting more distributed.
You have mobile device management systems and all that kind of stuff. You also have to monitor for proper use of the mobile device, such that rules like copying and pasting and
what apps you can put on and can't put on, right? And of course, as we shift some of those things to the cloud, it gets even more complicated, because then you've got more layers to work on that. So it's a fun challenge.
Yeah. So what else are we seeing in the multiplicity of endpoints in the federal space?
I think it goes back to with the endpoints and the mobility. They really kind of go hand in hand. I know, for example, at DHS, we have 13 component SOCs that are responsible for monitoring their own endpoints in their lands. And although the capabilities vary across the department, the majority have dedicated 24/7 teams of security monitoring experts whose job it is not only to understand the cyber threats and the analysis in general, but also to be well versed in the unique risk profile of their individual component networks, including their security architecture, their high value assets, and dedicated security tools and the implementations. We're trying to standardize right now on a common mobile device management. We have several right now.
This is across DHS.
Across DHS. We're using GOOD. We're using several different products right now. We do want to try to standardize, and I think that'll help. But echo what Larry was saying, we have a lot of the same setup and configuration with our mobility, and still maturing.
Yeah, because you were at FEMA at some point in your career, and they have a well-known program of going out into the field, and they're gathering a lot of personally identifiable information, a lot of federal information in those devices in the aftermath of a disaster. So the question then is, how well do things like MDMs, and there's several brands out there that are popular in the government, do they have APIs or otherwise have hooks into continuous monitoring for cybersecurity setups that you might have? How does that, are those two worlds in the same domain?
I think they have to be, yeah. I think we started with, MDM is almost a Band-Aid, because we knew that there was this proliferation of demand for mobility. And so we put on the MDMs as the first protective measure, but what we didn't necessarily do, and I can speak for us at AG, is how does that integrate with the rest of our program, the rest of our monitoring? And as we're looking to go to ideas of bring your own device or things like that, and the policy around that, it's not just, okay, what are we doing here with MDM? It's how does that fit into our cloud email strategy? How does that fit into our monitoring around our email? And we end up asking, we're coming up with more questions than answers. But I think that's a good thing because it means we're thinking about the system as a whole instead of, I'm going to look at mobility here and endpoint here and cloud here. It's got to be a systems approach. If we don't approach this from a systems approach, we're gonna miss something, or we're gonna come up with a suboptimal solution, and eventually we're gonna be in trouble.
Peter, comments?
Yeah, I mean, so I do security services for a living. I don't do much around MDM. It's pretty boring. It works. It's about where it's going to be. It's fairly mature. It's also fairly limited. But so in terms of like investment, it's just almost a no-brainer these days and has been for a while. That's good. I think in terms of systems and investment, identity access management is where you go. I think that's the thing that sort of binds everything together. It doesn't matter where your data is. The other thing that's valuable when it comes to protecting endpoints is monitoring email and protecting email, because everything's got to get to that device somehow. We tend to rely on things like encryption on mobile devices and things, being able to do remote wipes and stuff like that in order to protect the device itself, but it's how the data gets there, how the apps get there, that you can do something about.
Interesting. So they're here to stay, and so we need an approach that maybe virtualizes out some of the inherent lack of security that are in those devices?
It's to some degree, it's a cognitive problem. It's what we think of as a computer. Like if you look at the new Microsoft tablets that are coming out, they're pretty much or laptops. I mean, they have been for a while. The new Apple tablet iOS 11 is basically going to be a desktop OS that you put on a tablet and you can attach a keyboard and you have a laptop, right? So the differences between what we think of as a computer and a mobile device and anything else is, what is really the difference? I think it makes sense to sort of flatten all of this stuff in terms of our perspective on just what the thing is, and think in terms of everything being virtual. In this sense, everything's cloud again, right? We can just say there's data, there are perimeters that we have to think about in terms of business process, software, because everything's ultimately software defined, and mobile devices are really just a reminder that that's the reality.
I guess the mobile question brings us to something really important that is on the minds of a lot of federal agencies, despite the worldwide worms going around and viruses and so forth, and that is the insider threat. And you obviously know that there's two basic types of insider threats: the people that want to do harm and the people that accidentally do harm because of those phishings and so forth that comes in. And so how can insider threat prevention thinking come into this whole area of advanced monitoring? Can it? Peter Tran?
I think it can. I think we need to think about insider threat a little bit differently. I think that if we're putting people there on the inside, historically, and we just sort of gravitate towards that, right? The surreptitious individual or individuals. But it's the rogue environment that becomes surreptitious. And what keeps me up at night, and this ties into mobility, is the app world that we're living in. Because globally, we probably average about 3 devices per person. I'd say roughly 3 devices. So I think the last statistic I'm aware of is 175 billion apps were downloaded. In-app economies, IRS has their own app. You can actually file your taxes, right? So an insider threat can actually be a software-defined threat that can establish a foothold, and the human aspect of the threat becomes an extension or a variable of that. So if you manage third-party risk appropriately, you can do all the best practices around provisioning, deprovisioning, monitoring your third-party vendors. You look at the Target breach, right, as an HVAC. So you look at those from the commercial side, but then you look at the ties between clear defense contracting and federal government and the trusted partner connections, and then that really keeps me. I'm more concerned from an insider threat looking at what I'm going to call micro breaches versus the larger macro smash and grab exfil, because manipulation and destruction of data, even at the small level, that becomes a problem for continuous monitoring. We can't necessarily see those because they're trying to manipulate a larger foothold in our environment as we're in this moment. This is the scariest one, I think, because we're in transition We're in a new generation moving into, this is by far the best window for our adversary to start to establish new footholds and take advantage of the old ones. So I think of it in different terms for insider threat.
How does the Justice Department think about it?
So
I mean,
it's
obviously from a legal standpoint,
right. I'm not going to go touch any of that today.
that's down the hall.
Yeah, that's right. So we're doing a lot of different things on that, and we are, as I said on the mobile, we're trying to bring everything together in a way that helps the mission succeed and prevents the inadvertent insider. Right? We don't want to punish people for making a mistake. We got to give them the tools and the education and the capabilities that they need to do their job safely and securely. So that's one part of it. The malicious insiders is a little more interesting in how we go about managing that, and so awareness, knowledge, monitoring of what people are doing, where data is, who's accessing it, how they're using it, are kind of the fundamentals of that. But it gets really complicated in the larger agencies, and especially when you have the multiple levels of information from unclassed public data to more classified stuff.
Yeah, because the conventional thinking on this is that, well, everyone has a baseline activity profile, and therefore you monitor for things that are out of band.
Right,
But with teleworking and people traveling, I mean, it gets to be a little bit more difficult to, I think, effectuate operationally than it is to describe conceptually, this whole idea of how you monitor people.
Two things to bear in mind there. One is that insider monitoring need not be continuous. It's not like monitoring for ransomware. Like, it's not like you're going to get hit by an insider threat out of nowhere. It's not like this stuff is rolled in wherever and comes in and surprises you. These things happen over time, and they are almost always detectable if you have knowledge of the employer, of the insider, which means that you have to distribute the monitoring. You can't put it in a SOC, which is run by nerds, right, whose job it is to take network traffic apart and understand it. You have to understand the people who are actually involved, and you have to have relationships with them, which means that, again, we get back to what does the business look like, what does the organization look like, and how do you get the information to the hands of people who actually understand the personalities, the quirks, the schedules, the habits of those people who are potential threats.
Yeah, old Henry, he always loads his zip drive at 3 a.m. and
Or
we're used
somebody
to it.
happens to travel to China. I've seen this in lots of places, particularly high-level people in government agencies who will go to China because some of their businesses there, right? Or people who are teleworkers who are on the road all the time. So it's the traditional ways of doing this stuff from afar. They just don't work in an insider context.
All right, in the few, I'm sorry, Chad.
Know
something
your
ahead?
business. Yeah. Know your business, right? You want to segment information. We worked on Need to Know many moons ago. I remember first implementing it when I was with the Navy, and people complained, but we had important information and data we had to protect. And so if I worked in this area, I didn't need to know the secrets of reactor design, right? Know your business. Keep the information. Now, if there's a business need for sharing of information, then talk about it. If you know your business, again, this is not an IT problem, it's a business problem.
All right, in the few moments we have left, we have just a couple of minutes, maybe just comment on the Trump administration executive order on cybersecurity. There are deadlines coming up for that. And, but more generally, where you think this whole idea of advanced monitoring, advanced cybersecurity detection will be, say, a year from now.
Barry and I, we were just chatting about that on the break, and I'll leave some meat on the bone for you here, Barry. So, I think this second EO, because we had EO 13636 from the prior administration, teed things up. Right? So we're at this point where there's a call for action around modernizing or innovation, and then connect it, and then be smart. Because where the glimpse is, we're moving into smart government, smart cities, enhance of quality of living. And in that, I think the first two are really going to set the pace of what we're going to see in security as an outgrowth of that. If we can bridge that gap effectively in transitioning and transforming the current infrastructure to where we need to go, and then effectively connecting them and then being efficient around a smart environment.
Okay, and Barry, the other side of the bone there?
Yeah, I'm excited about this new executive order. I finally have seen, I think in the last 30 years now, a real focus on cyber from the secretary level all the way down, where they're being held accountable. So I'm excited. I think the White House is really taking this seriously, from direct reports to the President, to the National Security Council, to NIST, to all the major departments, and also the small agencies that a lot of times say, no, we don't really need to do that, or we don't have to. They are all being held accountable. So I'm excited. I think it's got teeth. I think we're going to see great progress.
All right, on that note, it's time to bring this to a close. I wish we had another hour, but we don't. Let me thank today's guests, though. Lawrence Reed is Assistant Director for Security Operations at the Justice Department. Chad Sheridan, Chief Information Officer at Agriculture Department's Risk Management Agency. Dr. Barry West is Senior Advisor and Senior Accountable Official for Risk Management at the Homeland Security Department. Peter Tran is General Manager and Senior Director for Worldwide Advanced Cyber Defense Practice at RSA. And Peter Schauwacker, Director of Security Intelligence Solutions at Optiv. I'm Tom Temin, federalnewsradio.com and Federal News Radio 1500 AM. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsradio.com and search In Focus.
On behalf of Federal News Radio, thank you for joining us. A link to the archive session will be sent to you shortly. If you requested a training certificate, you will also receive an email with download instructions after the webinar. This concludes our discussion. Thank you.